colony, right? What does each part of that snake represent? You remember?
Snake colony.
Now, as pieces, is this a whole snake?
No.
If the snake were to join together, would it have a better chance of being alive?
Yes.
Is this the same thing for the colonies?
Yeah.
Okay, so we know that this is what the snake symbolize. And we talked about the Iroquois and about Ben Franklin's plan for colonial unity. And he wanted one general government. Do we kind of have that now? Sort of? Kind of? Yeah, sort of. We don't have a president general. We have a president who is a mere figurehead like the Queen of England. Ben Franklin is not a happy man overall at the way things are panning out. And then he talked about how the colonies and the different parts of the country were divided through these different things. This was a biggie, the transportation and slow communication. You can't have a united colonial system if you don't have the communication because it might take 2 or 3 days to ride from Connecticut to Massachusetts or something. So that's not quick. Remember we talked about how long it took a newspaper to get from one point to another, like up to 3 months. So that's going to be a big problem. Now, today we have better communication. One of you could send me a text message right now and I'd get it in a second. Not so back then. They didn't have cell phones yet. So what is continuously happening in the first years that the colonies are being established? You're getting a lot of immigrants coming in. A lot of them are coming in unwillingly, and of course those would be the Africans that we are importing. So you have about 250,000 black men, women, and children that will take the Middle Passage, which is what? What's the Middle Passage, you remember? Anybody?
The boat with the players on it.
And they take what's called the Middle Passage, which is the route across the Atlantic. You'll also get 250,000 Scots-Irish coming over, 135,000 Germans. My family is from Germany, and they migrated here in like the 1820s. My great-grandfather's last name was Vipperman, which is actually should be Wipperman because the E is W in German. So yeah, my people came over during this time. My dad's people were already here since he's Native American. You're going to get a sprinkling. These are just the main flavors, like a banana split or a sundae, and then you're going to get a sprinkling of others. The Swiss, the Swedes, Highland Scots, Spanish Jews, things like that. Of course, the English, they were the first ones. And a lot of these people are going to come over as indentured servants. They can't afford to come over by themselves because it costs money to pack 14 kids on a boat and take them to the New World. So you kind of just hire them out along with yourself. The slave population will grow naturally, meaning that slaves know how to reproduce. This is a basic instinct. The birth rate among slaves was about 3 times that of the birth rate today. The big reason behind this being they didn't have what? Birth control, right. There's this old wives' tale that as long as if you're a mother and as long as you're nursing the child, you're supposed to not be able to get pregnant.
Sorry.
It ain't going down. Don't rely on that. Look at Michelle Duggar. Women will bear between 5 and 8 children, the slave women, and most of them will survive to maturity, about 80% across the board. because you have all this ethnicity, this difference in the different groups of people, the slaves, the Scots, the natives, everybody else, chirping in with their 2 cents, you're not going to have a real good common identity. As Americans, theoretically, do we have a common identity now? In theory. I'm not saying in practice, in theory. We're what? We're Americans. So is that a common theoretical identity? Are there any German Americans in here other than myself? Italian Americans? Swedish American? Native American? French American? Do you see? While we are all American, there are substructures under there, subgroups under there. So this could not be more true than it is in this era. Only problem is we don't have something called the Civil Rights Act. Women don't have rights. Women are property. Slaves are property. They're seen as less than animals. So you can't have this diverse population, these strict caste systems, which is what they are. Because, we borrowed that essentially from India. The caste system. And then I think it's like in India it's the Brahmin. And I did know all of them, but I can't remember them now. But this is where we get the idea. We borrow it from India. So because you have all this diversity and the need to keep all of this separated and away from the little group of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men, you can't have a common identity. What will finally unite all the colonies? War, right. But not to the extent that you think. Of course, we all know by now that along the coastline there's a lot of people living there because that's where everybody just sort of stopped. Hey, we like it here. Let's stay here. Besides, that mountain looks pretty high and I don't want to get my pretty shoes dirty today. And it might mess up my pretty wig. So we won't go over those mountains. A few brave souls will venture out into the area like the Long Hunters. Please do not think for the first inkling that Daniel Boone was the first Long Hunter in this area. He was not. A guy named Elijah Walden was. Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett came after. So you got too many people on the coast. So that means there's no land for all these new people. So they're going to have to brave the wilds, walk across that big old mountain, get their shoes dirty, and settle the new land. You had some land in New England, but the soil's not great for growing things. People are forced to go onto the frontiers. Who's ever seen the movie Last of the Mohicans? With Daniel Day-Lewis and that Madeline Stowe. When they're on their way to Fort Monroe, they go through and they have these little isolated farms, and they go through and that one they've killed everybody and burned everything. So they're going to have to take their lives in their own hands and move to the frontier if they want that American dream of owning property. Now, while I would like to own property, I wouldn't risk my scalp for it back then. It's not worth it. I'd sharecrop first, but that's just me. You have different areas settled by different groups of people. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont are settled by old Yankee families. Those are old English families. In the 1720s, the Germans and the Scots-Irish will go into western Pennsylvania, Virginia, and the Carolinas. They're especially going to settle in Pennsylvania and Virginia because of one natural resource. What is it? Natural resource. Coal, right. the majority of the people in Pennsylvania, western Pennsylvania, and most of Virginia and parts of the Carolinas mined coal once they figured out it was good for something. So you're going to have a lot of Germans and Scots-Irish there. And they're going to concentrate around the coal mining areas. If you lived in the back country, chances are your neighbor was about 2 days' walk away. You're not going to be able to grow a cash crop. If you live in the back country, is there a nice interstate highway that brings you to the coast? No, there's not. You follow old game trails to get wherever you're going. You have some wagon roads. They're basically ruts that if your wagon lands the wrong way, you're going to bust a tire. And you can't just, go buy a new one at the store and, like we do. They have to make their wagon wheels. They can't move a large number of crops. Eventually, this will lead to the creative idea of brewing corn and other crops into liquid corn to be sold and bartered among other settlers in that area, or to transport to whichever towns are closest. And these are our first bootleggers, even though it's not illegal at this time. They had livestock, but they can't really sell it. It's mostly for their survival. They're isolated. They don't have a lot of money. They rely on a barter system. Sir? What's a barter system? Right, example. I live on a farm and I just dropped my only needle to sew my family's clothing through the floor and I can't find it because there is a skunk under my house. And, let's see, who's got a needle? Miss Athena has several needles, but she needs some of my lye soap to wash her clothes with. So I say, I would like to barter with you and give you 2 bars of my wonderful soap for one of your needles. And that's how it works. Men, it was different. They would barter tobacco, liquid beverages in a jar that you do this, things like that. So you're going to have a barter system. You're going to be more equal in the back country as well because you don't have all those social classes. You don't have the very, very poor, the small middle class, and the huge rich class. Everybody is on an equal basis. Anybody and everybody can get scalped. Anybody and everybody can get typhoid or be stampeded by a herd of wild horses or something. Everybody's more equal, including the women, to some extent. They have just as much chance of dying as anybody. And probably more so because they have high-tech hospitals for delivering babies. No. Infant mortality rate will be about 1 in 4. And women who die in childbirth will be about 1 in 10. And that's a modest estimate. Life in the backcountry is not easy. Duh. How many would say that life is easy today? Life is a 4-letter word, people. Yeah. Women will have all the farm chores that they'll have to do. They have to milk cows, they have to feed the chickens, gather the eggs, tend gardens, wash clothes, make cloth to make clothes, make the thread to make the clothes, take care of the babies, cook the food, grow the food, store the food. Essentially, they're busy. They're also expected to help their husband and their sons in the fields. Usually, this is why they have such big families. You need a lot of people to work the fields. My great-grandmother had 17 children. All of them single births. My grandmother was the youngest of 17. And when it was time for chores, her and her brother that was born right before her would go fish at the river all day to bring home fish for dinner. They would fish for a little while and then just play in the river. You needed a big family. My grandmother had 11 children. They didn't have to have farm hands. You just had big families. That's the way it worked. Men, once they get their work done, which is rare, will drink. You know, that corn's going somewhere. They're going to fight a lot, because when you start drinking the corn, you're going to, somebody says, yo man, your wife's awful pretty. Oh yeah. You get a fight. They're going to go hunting as a release, so they'll go out and shoot poor little innocent Bambi and bring it home to feed people. Of course, they do use the whole thing. I don't hunt, and I just don't, this is not my thing. Women have no way to do this. They're not allowed to go hunting, even though if you're a woman in this time, is it a good idea to know how to use a gun? You're darn tootin' it is. Because your husband might go on a hunt for a couple of days. You're stuck at home. Not only do you have to worry about, in this area, black bears, mean raccoons, possums, yeah. What are some other mean animals? Cougars. Salamanders, cougars, wolves, yeah, wolves, and ostriches with attitudes, as my little cousin Megan calls them. Yeah, there's a lot of things, but women aren't allowed to go hunting. They really aren't allowed to say a whole lot because they have to be obedient to their husband. So women are just they're kind of in limbo. If somebody came up and told me I couldn't teach history anymore, and I had to sit at home and I couldn't do anything but sit there and do everything that my husband told me to do, I'd be stoned to death and weep. But this is all they knew. This was their life, and they knew they were dependent upon their family for their survival. Women will handle the spiritual aspect in most families. The men kind of forget about it every now and then. But when they do get a preacher to come through, they go to church, with their families, pray, sing, things like that. So women are going to handle the spiritual aspects of the family life. And the fact that your neighbor might live 2 days walk away from you means you're not going to get to spend a whole lot of time with other people. This is why you're going to have the work parties, the barn raisings, the corn shuckings, the field clearings. If you had somebody that was injured and couldn't plow their fields, you would go plow their fields and tend their farm until they got better, or to a point where their children could take care of it. So there's a lot of isolation. I know there's days when you're sitting at home, and I know I have the same problem. I text a couple of my friends, I don't hear from them. And you just feel like you don't have a friend in the world. Like, oh my gosh, these people are ignoring me. Imagine this times a bazillion. You're literally out in the middle of nowhere, and the only people you have to talk to are your children, your husband, and the farm animals. And chickens do not make good conversation. You have a lot of social conflict on the frontier, duh. You have a lot of different ethnic groups with a lot of different religious beliefs. And it's not uncommon for the Catholics to beat up on the Baptists and the Presbyterians to beat up on the Lutherans. There's all kinds of things that will just make people go and just fight each other. But cheap land or free land will bring people off of the East Coast because it's too crowded. The Scots, Irish, and the Germans will stay in the towns just long enough. They get enough money, they take off. They're like, we're not putting up with this. And a lot of the Germans will create their own communities and make people suspicious of them because they think they're up to something. They isolate themselves in small communities in the backcountry. Ben Franklin, ever the thinker, and we know now a gigolo, sees the backcountry as a way to get rid of all these surplus people. If you have all these people in the cities and they're going at each other, what are the chances that a lantern will get knocked over and the whole town will go up in flames? San Francisco fire, cow kicked over a lamp, set the town on fire. he says, okay, we've got this land that doesn't belong to anybody, even though it belongs to the natives. So we'll send them that way. If they get killed, oh well. They went. We didn't tell them to. They just went. Even though we offered them some land and da-da-da-da. But, they're out of our hair, and that's all we're worried about. But he's also going to see a lot of the problems that the people in the backcountry are going to face. And those are numerous. Ben Franklin and Henry Clay, I believe, would have gotten along very well. Who was Henry Clay? Remember? You gotta know this. Civil War. He was known as the Great Compromiser. Ben Franklin is going to be the compromiser and mediator between a group called the Paxton Boys. The Paxton Boys have this ludicrous idea that the government don't really care if they get scalped or not. Shocker. Do they care if they get scalped or not? No, they don't. So they want the government to build some forts to protect them and not worry about the plantations on the coast, because most of the Indians are already gone from there. And they need protection now, and they don't want to do this. So to protest, the Paxton Boys went out and killed some Indians. Okay, number one, if you kill Indians, other Indians are going to hunt them down and kill you. That's a bad move in itself. The government's not going to like it, because you're ruining what little bit of good relations we may already have with that tribe. The government's not happy. So the boys are all fired up. They just, killed some people. They're probably enjoying some corn in liquid form. So they said, ha-ha, we're going to march to Philadelphia. Anybody ever see the episode of South Park where Cartman was involved in that Civil War battle reenactment? And they ended up going to Washington, D.C. It's essentially the same thing. They get to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And Ben Franklin steps in and says, whoa, boys, let's talk about this. And he sits down with them, and they say, okay, here's what's going on. My brother's wife got scalped, and her kids got taken by this tribe, and now they're forced to be slaves, da-da-da. So Franklin sits down, writes all this stuff down, and says, okay, I'll go talk to them. So he goes and promises to talk to the government about this. Then you have some settlement in the Carolinas going on. The main settlers in the Carolinas, especially South Carolina, were from Barbados. I would know that. I know it's not up there yet, but I would know it.
From where?
Barbados.
Can you say the whole sentence again, please?
I'm sorry?
Can you say that whole sentence again?
The first real settlers to the South Carolina area were from Barbados. Now, in the Carolinas, mostly you're going to have plantations. Not so much huge, but plantations nonetheless. So, there's going to be a vast difference between the rich and the poor. Has anything changed? No. Will it ever change? No. The planters dominate the government. They dominate everything. So the little guy's getting left out. And they're not getting equal political representation, which is something that the Revolutionary War will be fought over, taxation without representation. These people are being overlooked. And they don't have basic legal institutions. They don't have a courthouse. If you buy property, where do you have to register that deed? The courthouse. If there are no courthouses and somebody kills your kid, how are you going to have a trial for them? Even though they had backwards justice, but I didn't say that. You might find somebody dangling from a tree. You never know. So a group emerges called the Regulators. And they're going to have two major protests. In the 1760s, the farmers are going to protest because the colonial assembly will not set up courts in the back country. If they want anything legal done, they have to travel to the main city. Does that take a day out of their work? Yeah, that means the wife is getting twice as much stuff to do while the husband has to go take care of the legal stuff. And do they have a postal service yet? Nope, so you have to be there in person. They also want protection from outlaws. Remember, this is an area that has no real law enforcement system going on. So you got people running around stealing livestock, kidnapping women, raping women, killing men, stealing slaves and selling them back to other slave owners. And they want basic protection. Are they out of line wanting this? No, they're not. If you've read any Locke, who's a philosopher, as participants in giving up some of our natural rights to a government, we are expecting that government to make up for those rights that we give up. We can't go out and kill somebody that beats up our kid. In nature, if somebody beats up your kid, you can go out and beat them up. In a society where you give up that right and the government takes up that responsibility, you can't do that anymore. So, according to Locke, the government that you give some of your power to has a responsibility to you. And this was not being adhered to by the government. Do they have a reason to protest? Yes, they do. A cow was expensive. You don't need some dude coming and stealing your cow like cattle rustlers down in the plains. The regulators will become vigilantes. Ooh, who didn't see that coming? Case in point, Chicago riots. Policemen take off their badge at the convention and start beating protesters in 1968. They became vigilantes. Same thing happens here. The regulators threatened to go after Charleston, which is, I guess, the largest city at the time. And the government finally gave in and established a court system and somewhat of a law and legal system. Western North Carolinians will organize to fight their corrupt local governments. Can you imagine a corrupt government? Gee, never heard of one of those before. Nope. Saddam Hussein, Abel de Marcos, anybody else? Fidel Castro. No, those don't exist. Crooked politicians, of course, seize control of politics. Is that a surprise to anybody? Nope. It's the ruthless that make out in this world more. They're going to use their power to their advantage. If you have to register a deed, they're going to charge you about 7 times what it would normally cost. They impose taxes. They manipulate the debt laws. They're the ones that are keeping you in perpetual servitude. The regulators will eventually seize the court and protest. If you seize the court, can any government business take place? No, it can't. But the militia is sent in and they're defeated. Of course, they were outgunned. And the crazy thing is, the militia was like their friends and neighbors and family and stuff. It's got to be weird. You have a battle in Alamance in 1771. Where the Western North Carolinians are going to try to attack the seaboard. And they're going to actually try to do this. And there are some problems. Remember we were talking earlier that diversity can sometimes be the biggest obstacle in unity? Well, this is going to happen here. You have to look at who lives where. The Atlantic coast are going to be the English because they were there first. In the interior, you're going to have the the minorities, white minorities, Germans, Scot, Irish. And according to the English, everybody's inferior. Even each other. You know, the Queen says, well, I'm looking down my nose at you. And the King says, I'm looking down my nose at you. And everybody is inferior. You have a missionary with the Anglican Church who will actually travel in the backcountry and kind of notice how things work back there. He's going to be the one to start pointing finger at the Germans because they won't associate with anybody else. They're hard workers. Well, I don't care if you were from Pluto or Mars. Back then, if you wanted to eat, you had to work hard. That's not a problem. They're clean people. They take a bath. After 1066, Europe didn't bathe for about 1,000 years. Well, not quite 1,000 years. About 800 years. But they saw them as inferior because they had a trade system among themselves. They kept to themselves. And they did not like outside interference. Wait a minute. There's a problem here. Why does the Revolutionary War start? It starts because we don't want outsiders interfering in our business. Interesting concept, isn't it? They're targeting these people for the exact same reason that we try to get independence from Britain. Like I say, there are no new concepts. Franklin even gives them a nickname called the Palatine Boers. I don't know what that means. I tried to find out. I can't figure it out. Of course, you're going to have boundary wars. We still have those today. We own part of some property in Whitville. And the guy that used to live next door, who is now, I think, in a nursing home, he was like 412, decided that he was going to fence a legal right-of-way between the two pieces of property so his cows could have more room. So he starts building this fence that goes like this all over our property. So I had to run up there and take care of it. So you're going to have boundary disputes. It's going to kind of get ugly, especially in Vermont. Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys in 1760 are going to object when New York claims that Allen purchased Vermont. But the governor still wants to control the area, so they try to render his purchase null and void. So Allen and the Green Mountain Boys will resist, and they're going into New York and just doing all kinds of uncouth things like occupying the courthouses, and then they set up their own justice system on what's called Green Mountain, which is where they get their name from. You have a tenant uprising as well. In the 1740s, in the New England area, you have a bunch of squatters. What is a squatter?
Somebody who lives there without leaving.
Right, somebody that stays on land that's not legally theirs. The landlords started evicting people, and then the riots would start. In the 1680s, most of the land in the Hudson River Valley is owned by two families. So there's like 2 million acres, and you got people squatting all the time on this property because there's nowhere else to go. The new immigrants want to buy the land, but do these people want to give up their land? No. Why do they want to keep that property? What does property signify? Wealth, exactly. So in 1757, you have an armed insurrection, and the tenants will actually break into the homes of some of the landowners. Some of the houses get burned down, and a bunch of people get killed. You can't hog all the land. You can make money if you sell it. You can buy more stuff to compensate for loss of wealth. In the 18th century, most people will live near the ocean, near the coastal area. Even what's considered Western Carolina, they consider coastal. And this is where all the cities will be. In 1750, a typical city was between 8 and 22,000 people. I would know that. Is that a lot of people? Yeah, that's a lot of people. How many people would you say, I mean, I've looked this up and I did know. In Kingsport, there are about 210,000 people. I think, roughly. It's what it was a few years ago. I have to really look up that number. But so that's, today we, things are better now, in theory. Most people will still stay on the coasts and cluster around the seaports where there are jobs and things like that. You can get a job as a shipping yard, as a sailor, things like that. This is where you had houses, shops, taverns where you can go discuss business. Like you want to buy a horse from a guy. Meet me at the tavern and I'll buy you a pint of ale and we'll talk about the price of this horse. It was just a social business sort of thing. In 1750, Philadelphia was the biggest and most populated city. The book I'm reading right now talks about Philadelphia. It's really kind of neat about how it was during this time. And commerce has become the lifeblood of the seaport economy. Is there a lot of land to farm? So a lot of these people will have farms out further and then have their big houses in the cities and then conduct business there. Let's see. The middling classes, which will become the middle class, are skilled craft workers and artisans. Your tanners, your cobblers, haberdashers. What do haberdashers make? Hats, right. You have people that specialize in making steel or iron things, like these are they put on the oxen to pull the plow. What are those called? Yokes, things like that. You have specialized artisans doing these things. You have shipbuilders. You have to ship things to get money out of them. So people build ships. Blacksmiths, they have to have nails and stuff to hold shit together, or when you put it in the water, it's going to go and everybody will sink. This is not good. You have to have sails. Do they have outboard motors or solar panels? No, they don't. So you have to have sailors do this. You have people that learn to be butchers. We did an activity in my History 2 class about that book, The Jungle, by Upton Sinclair, where they had to read an excerpt from, the turn of the century slaughterhouses. And even then they were kind of just, ugh. I mean, I had one girl had to leave the room. She's like, oh, this is just gross. So you have people that are butchers. You don't have the industrialized meat processing plants yet. So you go to a butcher to buy your meat products. Millers will grind your corn and your wheat into flour and cornmeal, things like that. And they'll put some little tiny rocks so that you wear your teeth down over time. If you were to go to Rocky Mount, we took a group of kids up there when I worked at a daycare. And they had to grind with a little thing. They had to grind corn. And then the first thing they noticed when they were mixing it up, they were finding little pieces of pebbles in there. And then they wonder why they find skulls that have the teeth worn down. They're eating rocks, for crying out loud. You have distillers. Clean water, things like that. You have bakers, cobblers, wig powderers. Why do you think wig powders are so important? What do the men wear to make them look pretty? Wigs. Wigs are a status symbol. Sort of like jeans down to here showing your underwear now. It was the way to look hip, okay? And this comes over from England. They still wear the powdered wigs in Parliament. The barristers still wear the powdered wigs because they look pretty. It's fun. You have shop and tavern owners. Well, you're always going to have these. You can have these back in ancient Rome. ancient Greece. So these are the middling class, or what will become the middle class. The lower class, they get to have all the fun. They're free and indentured whites. You have free laborers, and they're young men and women, white men and women, and they'll do different kinds of jobs. Women will mostly be like prostitutes, seamstresses, sometimes both, domestic servants. The men will be like sailors, artisans. They will learn a trade. They'll be an apprentice like Johnny Tremaine. There you go. I've still never seen all that movie. I may have to rent that one day. You have apprentices and indentured servants that do all the menial work while the big boss sits back and collects the money. At this point in time, most of the slaves are concentrated in the South because of the plantation system that's emerging. Some will work as dock workers. There are stories of dock workers in Memphis, Tennessee that are slaves, that are owned by these different companies. They can be assistants in craft shops. A lot of these Africans come over with skills. They've been tanning leather longer than anybody. They know how to hammer gold into jewelry. They're artists. And of course, household servants. Butlers, footmen. What's a footman? You ever seen Gone with the Wind? You know the two guys that ride on the back of the carriages and hop down when they have to get out of the carriage? Those are footmen. Women in the cities are going to have a different kind of lifestyle than women on the frontier. Rich women will have a more leisurely lifestyle because they have a lot of servants. Non-wealthy women don't do a lot of housework because they usually have a job. And they'll have to keep a garden and chickens and kill the chickens and pluck the chickens and gut the chickens and cook the chickens and serve the chickens and clean up after the chicken dinner's done, and that whole process of the chicken family thing. But they will have access to markets. Where is the food in the markets coming from? They grown in the streets? Be coming from local farms. So they can go to the market. They don't have to grow everything or make everything. Women on the frontier even had to make their own candles. And this is why a lot of the families kept bees, because they would use the wax to make candles. If you've ever had a bee wax candle, you can get them that still has the honey coming in. And when it burns, it releases the scent of that honey. Oh my gosh. It smells delicious. You really should try it. Women could support themselves. You don't find many women that are unmarried. For the women that are not married, they're going to be maids, cooks, laundresses, seamstresses, nurses, things like that. Even though they're not trained nurses, they'll work with a doctor. And I use that term loosely. They have higher paying jobs if you train to be a midwife, if you train to deliver babies, if you can make dresses. If you're a good seamstress, you can make a lot of money. A lot of women that are married will help their husbands if they have an artist shop. Like you have a lot of female blacksmiths at this time. Just slinging a hammer just as good as her husband. I mean, if you ever see The Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger, she was a blacksmith and she made an awesome armor for him. So, widows will do different things. A lot of times they will have like grocery stores, taverns, print shops. They will run boarding houses or hotels or inns, things like that. And within the seaport cities, you have 1 in 10 women working outside the home. I'm going to skip that one. There's a downside to seaport and city living. Isn't that what they learned in England? If you get too many people on the seaport and people are dumping their chamber pots in the road on top of people's heads, there's going to be problems. the main avenue to make money in the cities is through commerce. Anybody ever been out on a cruise and had a weird storm move up just out of nowhere? Or on a lake even, and you get the water with the boats going by. Alright, the ocean's not stable, it's not flat, and it's not calm, unless you're the Titanic. So there's a danger to the ships. There's also those huge sea creatures that can just reach up and grab them, like in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. If I'm being funny there, trying to be. So there's several things that could go wrong. There's a storm, the ship gets hit by a rogue wave, it sinks. It runs into some rocks that they don't see because they're all asleep. It sinks. The ship sinks. You could have pirates that steal the ship and the cargo and the people on the boat. Let's see. Aren't we having that same problem in Somalia right now? Pirates. Yeah. And of course, war. Any time of war, anybody's fair game, and so is their shipping stuff. You have immigrants coming in constantly, so there are going to be overcrowded cities. You get overcrowded cities, you get disease, you get crime. Do I need to go on with what can go wrong with that? You get epidemics and fires. The cow kicks over the lantern while you're in there milking it at 4 o'clock in the morning. Poof, city's gone. It's all made out of wood. You got crime rates are going high. You have higher mortality rates. The more and more people that go to these taverns, the more and more people get into fights, and at some point there's going to be a gun or a knife brought out, and somebody's going to die. Actually, it was wilder in this time than it was during the Wild West. You have, of course, social conflict. Ethnic diversity is a problem. People live too close together. Religious difference, class resentment. You got the wealthy showing off. They wear a ring, a diamond ring about this big around, and shove it in somebody's face. And then they get their finger bit off and lose their ring. Crime. Don't shake stuff off. Yeah. They wear pretty clothes, with the wigs and everything. If you've seen Assume the Position, I suggest you watch it. It talks about the way that different classes dress during this time. It's really funny. You have the poor people gathering in groups to kind of protest to the rich people, and some things are going to happen here. They're going to attack unresponsive politicians. If you don't have money in this time, are your politicians going to listen to you? If you have no money during this time, are your politicians going to listen to you? I keep proving my point. No new concepts. They're going to beat up on prostitutes, especially the Catholic families, because they just have a big problem with prostitutes. They just think that's just the worst thing in the world. And press gangs will show up, and these are sort of like the paparazzi without all the glitz and glamour. So, you have slave societies, of course, in the 18th century. In the South, 1 in 5 Americans in the South in 1775 are of African ancestry, and 90% of these live in the South. They live on plantations. They have distinct cultural and societal differences. Where'd voodoo come from? Who brought it with them? The slaves. They took their religion, blended it with Catholicism, voodoo, and it gets its birthplace in which state? Louisiana, right. We're coming up on Halloween, so they're going to have all those really cool historical haunted stuff on the History Channel. And there's a lot of really good history in there. I mean, I watch it for the history because I take notes when I watch these things. And I learn a lot. And I incorporate that into what I'm telling you now. So watch it. You can learn a lot, and it's entertaining. It's on TV, for crying out loud. The slaves are going to build stable families and communities. Now, how stable can a family be if you can be sold like that? But considering the circumstances, they did have stable families. Where a slave is auctioned will determine what's going to happen to them. If they went south, they lived on plantations. They might live with as many as 50 other slaves. Contrary to popular belief, not every slave owner had thousands of slaves. Most will have less than 50. They had no contact with whites, if any. They worked in rice paddies. I know you've seen Vietnam movies, Asian movies, where you see the women working in the rice paddies. And sometimes the owners implement something called a task system. They're given a task, and once that task is completed, they're finished for the working for the day. So if their task that day is to build 500 feet of fence, and they get it done by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they're finished. They don't have to do anything else. Pretty nice, huh? Not to mention the little breaks they get for lunch, and you have the slave mothers that go, feed their kids and visit them in the daycare center. Yes, I said the daycare center. We'll get to that later. There are some plantations in the Chesapeake area, so there will be some slaves there. They will have more contact with white people and with their owners and masters, and slavery in this area will not be as harsh. Let's see. You have importation of slaves taper off, but you really don't need to import any more slaves because they can reproduce. That's just like, I hate to say this, it's like breeding cattle. You have about 20 heads of cattle, 2 or 3 bulls and the rest female cows. You can, breed your own cattle. This is essentially what they're doing. Through natural reproduction, they're going to grow more slaves. Please don't think that I'm any way saying that's a good thing, because I'm not. That's just the best way to explain it. You have more and more, you have an equal number of men and women in the slave community, so you're going to have more families emerge. You can be bought or sold anytime. So you have that constant fear. If your master dies, then you might be divided among his children. So you could be split up again. You could have family members hired out to other plantations. This is very common. This brings in money for that one owner. The African culture will stay strong. We get a lot of our Southern culture from the Africans. Anybody surprised by that statement? A lot of our healing abilities back then, with herbs, things like that, come from Africa. We learn it from the slaves. We learn how to grow things from the slaves. Through them, we learn that if you put horse poo on something, it grows better. Of course, they would use wildebeest poo or something like that, wherever they lived. So we get our agricultural skills from them. We learn from their folk tales. And here, one day, we're going to be doing an African folk tale. Some of these things are just hilarious. Some of them are dirty, believe it or not. And I try not to use those because, they're very, have innuendos all throughout. So we get a lot of our music, jazz, the blues. A lot of our dances come from the slaves at this time. Except when white people do it, they just don't look as good. It's weird. We become better midwives because of the African midwives. They will often deliver babies for the plantation mistress and her daughters and Voodoo can be bad, but it's not always bad. So it's going to be concentrated mostly in Louisiana. Let's see. In Louisiana, they don't want to have slavery at first, but they finally give in. So they bring in 6,000 male slaves, mostly male slaves, and start setting up the plantation system. But the problem is, once they bring them in, Louisiana cannot produce a good cash crop at this time, and it won't be until cotton comes along that they will be able to. You have slave revolts, you read about those. The desired plantation economy in Louisiana will not evolve until the end of the 18th century. So it's going to be about 50 years, give or take. And slaves are going to do several jobs in Louisiana, and those are just some of them. They're encouraged to make products and sell them. They can plant their own gardens and sell the surplus, and a lot of slaves will be able to buy their freedom, which is kind of interesting. This is where a lot of the free blacks up north come from. And if you served in the French militia, you get your freedom if you're a black man. So you have a lot of black men who will join the French militia. You have, of course, resistance, revolts, things like that. Runaway slaves will form communities called maroons. I would know that. Problem is, once the settlements get too big, they're going to be found and then taken back to their owners. Slaves that have been here for a while have learned a few tricks on how to get around doing the hard work. And you're going to need to know these. There's a question on the test. They fake illness. Oh, my stomach hurts, massa. That's what they'd say. I can't work today. You wouldn't ride a sick horse. And that would be bad. If the horse was lame, you wouldn't ride the horse. They're going to pretend to be stupid or lazy. And it was just pretending. They're going to break tools. There's a rock there. Uh-oh, I broke my hoe. I can't work anymore. They're going to steal food. They're going to run away and hide in the forests or pretend to go on hunting trips for weeks at a time. They'll just take off and go visit their friends at the neighboring plantation. So these are some of the ways that they would try to get out of work. And it is a multiple choice question. So it's not one of those listing questions. Some of the slaves did escape and they find new lives up north. White people eventually will start to be afraid because they are outnumbered by their slaves. Okay, did they bring that on themselves? Yes, they did. They're scared of arson, poisoning, and insurrection. And this did happen. There's a story of a slave in Louisiana at Myrtle Plantation that accidentally poisons the family she worked for because she doesn't want to go work in the fields because the master is tired of her being his mistress. Cuts her ear off. She poisons his kids and kills his wife and kids. So people were poisoned. There were fires. They would put metal bars on their windows and their houses were made of wood. Anybody else find that just ridiculous? And you see the actors after, but daggone it, them window bars were intact. Let's build another wood house and put them back on there. Not the smartest people in the world. Before 1750, there were about 4 rebellions planned in Virginia, and they're all pretty much fought off. One of the most famous ones is Stono's Rebellion, and a slave named Jimmy, and will kill several white people before he is hunted down and killed himself. But despite all these fears, people continue to buy slaves and import slaves. And in Pennsylvania, you already have a group of people that see slavery as immoral, and it will be the Quakers. Then there is an Enlightenment and Awakening in America. Let me just read those. You have what's called the Enlightenment, and it emerges to show the differences between the different groups of people. And the leaders of Enlightenment follow philosophies. They're going to stress power of human reason to promote progress. People are pretty smart, they can reason, we can progress with that. And they reveal that if you have that laws govern nature and society. Can you govern nature? Can you tell a hurricane you can't come here, we have an injunction? What's that hurricane going to do? It's going to wipe you off the face of the earth. It don't care. Paper or no paper. I'm a hurricane. You can't tell me what to do. So this is kind of a flawed area of thinking. Of course, Ben Franklin is all about the Enlightenment. He loves to experiment. The guy stands out and flies a kite in a lightning storm that has a metal key on it. He's a few sandwiches short of a picnic sometimes. He's going to experiment with different things, and he will invent a stove that will heat homes better. It's called the Franklin stove. And I actually had a picture of one of these things. I was going to put it in here, and somebody got on my computer and erased it. I don't know how that happened. He actually toys around with electricity. Don't fly kite in a lightning storm, or you get Ben Franklin's fuzzy hair. And he will invent lightning rods, because it seems like every time it would storm, those metal crosses up on top of those wooden churches would draw lightning and burn the church down. Well, duh! Metal, hello. So he invents lightning rods, and they put them all over the towns, and it keeps the churches and the buildings from burning down. And we still use lightning rods today. There was one on top of the World Trade Center. Too bad it couldn't predict airplane strikes. You have amateur scientists doing different things. There is a question on your test about this. They will construct simple telescopes or invent them. Who had telescopes way before? The Mayans and the Aztecs and the Greeks and the Romans and the Babylonians. Yes, I said the Babylonians. They're going to start classifying all the animal species in North America. They're still working on this. They're going to research and discover the source of epidemics. Please don't empty your chamber pot in the street. Put it down in the outhouse instead. On your test there's a question, and it's going to ask you what these scientists did not discover. And you're going to love the answer. The clergy even starts to look at, and I use this as an oxymoron, liberal theologies. Why do I call that an oxymoron? It's two words that don't belong together. It's like saying liberal Republican. I had to finally start saying I'm more of a Democrat now instead of a Republican. So, in the mid-18th century, you have something emerge called rational Christianity. Note the look on my face. Is that possible? No, because it deals with the irrational, according to, like, you've got theoretical, then you've got physical. So, yeah. But it does lighten up a little bit, I will say that much. Under rational Christianity, God is a benevolent creator. I kind of like that idea. Before he was just this fire and brimstone, I'm going to strike everybody dead and get vengeance on them. Now they're seeing him as somebody that can be approached. Like in my History 2 class, we watched an episode of Christy because I showed them a work party And Miss Alice was talking to Aunt Polly T about what she believed God was. And she's a Quaker. So she believed that He's a benevolent God. And Aunt Polly T said, well, Miss Alice, you almost make the Almighty get at-able. This is what they're trying to do here. They're offering salvation to everybody. It's not just for a certain few. Everybody has the opportunity. Kind of like that. It's not an exclusive club anymore. And believe that God's greatest gift to humans was our ability to reason. I still have doubts with some of the people I know and their ability to reason. So this is a stretch back then. I have some friends, I'm pretty sure, they don't have anything going on up here. But they're fun, This will not affect how most people see things, though. By the mid-18th century, you have over half of white men and some white women that are literate. They can read and write a little bit. And I do have a minor in philosophy with my bachelor's degree, and I understand a lot of this stuff, but this was, 10 years ago? 15 years ago? No, wait a minute. 10 years ago. And I've forgotten some of it, but I still kind of know what it is. So if people can read and write, that's all hunky and dory. But they have the capacity to understand the abstract and not the concrete. They know what they need to do to survive. We can ponder, that God's this benevolent creature, but is that going to put food in our mouth? No, it's not. So a lot of people aren't going to get the philosophical side of the rational Christianity. They just kind of like that God's easier to get at. Most people will still read the Bible. My grandmother read it 5 times through before she died. And she said every time she found something new. You have more churches built. In northern colonies, 80% of the people there will attend church. I would know that. In the south, you have colonies spread out too far. This can't happen, so regular services are sporadic. Because you don't have an organized church, a lot of the ministers are afraid that people will abandon Christianity. When in reality, their isolation brings them closer to God. Because who do they have to rely on? They don't have soldiers and cops right down the street, do they? So where do they put their faith? In God. God will protect us. So it brings the family closer to God. And as a result of this, you get a religious revival starting in the mid-1700s. And this will happen not once, not twice, not 3 times, but repeatedly. Right now, down from where I live, there's a revival tent set up. The guy's there for 2 weeks. Every night, you see about 40, 50 people down there. You have the Great Awakening. Let's go back to that. You do have an aftermath of the Great Awakening. We'll go back to that. We're almost finished. Let's stop here.